Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to our 2022 Hilary Lecture. I would like to note to everyone present here live that this is being recorded and it is being live streamed. So we have people, the Anglican School Association was alerted, so we might have some of their teachers from all over the country participating, at least being able to watch and listen. So welcome to any of you that are joining us from other places. I know we've got friends all over the country that are likely doing that. So, that being said, could you please make sure your phones are silenced? And could you please remember that anything you say can and will be held against you on a recording. So again, welcome to our 2022 Hilary Lecture. This has been quite a season at St. Andrews. Many have heard around the country, so I'm sure many watching have also are also aware of this season. But I'm so glad to be back into the routine of having a Hilary Lecture, which is something we do during our Hilary term, which is the term we're in now. It's our winter term. It's a long tradition at St. Andrews Academy. We are very pleased to have Dr. David John Seal join us today and present to us his lecture, Education and Enchantment, Recovering the Lost Love of Learning. Dr. Seal has had a distinguished career, but most importantly to us here, he has served on our International Advisory Board at St. Andrews Academy for over 15 years. He has also written a number of books, most recently published including Network Power, The Science of Making a Difference, and Study Smart, A Christian Guide to Academic Success. We actually have a number of copies of Study Smart over on the table if anyone wants to pick up a copy. Both are available on Amazon. Both of those books were published by St. Andrews Publishing Arm, Whitworth Press, which also publishes the Anglican Office book, which has been quite a success. Lots of people enjoying that. Dr. Seal also serves as our professor for rhetoric and senior thesis here at St. Andrews Academy, and he is our college and career counselor at the Academy. And I've had many a day, I remember two students, one in particular, I said, well, we're going to meet with Dr. Seal. Yeah. Are you nervous? I'm scared. I said, well, he's going to make you work to get a place in college, at a good college. And she and her classmate ended up going to Hillsdale. Dr. Seal has been an educator his entire career, from the university world to the K-12 world, founding the Cambridge School of Dallas in mid-career and bringing his rowing team to the national championship. And how'd you place there when you're crew team?
First and second time.
What, the first time?
Bronze, third.
Bronze the first time, and the second time you went gold. So get them talking about crew and doing all that, and you'll have a long, fruitful conversation. I am honored to have the privilege of giving the introductory lecture this morning for Dr. Seal's keynote. Education and Enchantment, Recovering the Lost Love of Learning. During the season of youth, when boys and girls should most heartily be learning how to love and what to love, they are starved of the beauty of song and poetry, and instead are compelled to ingest cardboard and sawdust, informational texts, as the ugly slang has it, things that are not woven with enough craft to be called texts, and that don't possess enough truth or form to be called informational. Anthony Esselin is correct in his critique of our modern culture. Excuse me. And the education and formation of our young people in it. Why do we starve our young people? To paraphrase another point he makes in the same essay, why do Americans not produce beautiful things? The simple answer, he notes a couple of paragraphs later, is that we do not have beautiful things because we do not want them enough. We have not shaped the desires of our young people and our children. We have let the world shape the desires of the next generation, while we in the church and in Christian schools give them lists of do's and don'ts, trusting that the Holy Spirit will guide them into accomplishing the do's and avoiding the don'ts. That approach, as Dr. James K. Smith has pointed out in his book, Desiring the Kingdom, is a dead end in terms of formation and education. We think we're winning when we get all the data points in, when we finish the textbook by the end of the year, or when I've had my students read Gilgamesh, all of Homer, and 3 Greek dramas. Let me tell you, even if I don't manage to have my students finish all that literature in the time frame allotted, I know I've won when I'm reading out loud to my class the battle of Achilles and Hector found in the Iliad, and when the text tells of the death of Hector, I look up and there are tears in my students' eyes. That's when I know I've won. We must be about forming the desires of our students as well as forming the skills and the mental abilities of our students. I have encountered, oh so many more times than I ever wanted, students who come to my classroom from somewhere else, and their imagination, their wonder, and their love of good stories has been stifled and then ripped out of their hearts. Now, that's not just the reality that some people are literature and humanities people and some are STEM people. Actually, all of us have been created by God to love story. All humans have the desire and love of a good story. Look at what happens around the water cooler at work on a Monday. The chit-chat almost always includes the telling of stories. What I did over the weekend, the amazing play and the big game that I saw, the first steps of my co-worker's child, we tell stories all the time. We are made for story, but we can be malformed. Again, Esalen notes that we do not have beautiful things because we do not want them enough. We don't want them enough because we are malformed and crippling our next generation with the same or worse formation. Our young people's imaginations are engaged and formed by video games, Netflix binges, social media on their phones, and McDonald's. Poetry is not even on the table. Good novels are following poetry out the door. If an activity or object does not produce immediate pleasure or gratification, it is not engaged. We have children who do not love learning because they've never experienced it in the slightest, smallest manner, especially not in school. To address this topic I've raised, I hope you'll give a warm welcome to Dr. David John Seal.
It's an extreme pleasure to be with you. I want to be very clear that I feel in my bones a certain irony to be talking about education, because I, in spite of having spent many, many years in school, in formal school, I was in school for 31 years. 12, 4 for a master's, and 11 for a PhD. I mean, really a slow learner. But even more than that is that I perceive of myself as a struggling student. I have been around smart people, but for me, from the very beginning, school was not easy. It was difficult. I was the boy in the classroom gazing out the window, not paying a lot of attention. Now, in 1966, my mother talked my way talked her way into getting me a full scholarship at the Collegiate Boys School on the Upper West Side of New York. My father was doing his residency in cancer surgery at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And my mother, because we were missionaries, wanted me to have a good education and wanted me to start well. So she literally talked my way into this very, very prestigious, elite New York Upper West Side school. 9 years after I was there, John Kennedy attended the Collegiate Boys School. And in the spring of that year, my teacher in the first grade wrote on my report card. My teacher's name was Catherine Merchant, and I have this report card hanging on my office wall. And she writes, Johnny, which is what I was called, seems to like reading, and he has a good ear for phonics sounds. When he gives reading his undivided attention and his best effort, he reads well. Unfortunately, this is seldom the case. His concentration is poor, and he often loses his place. And at this time, Johnny is reading below average first grade level. So I start with that by simply saying, I start with a sympathy of having you here on a cold Saturday morning at 9 o'clock to hear a lecture on education. For most of us, education is death. I mean, it's the last thing you would associate with love and enchantment. And what I'm going to try to talk about is why we need to bring those kinds of concepts back in. Now, I do think that our systems, our educational systems, are perfectly designed for the results we're getting. And the results we're getting, any teacher, any parent would know are pretty abysmal. On international tests, in math, we're at the bottom. In general, we're in the middle. We spend more, but countries like Finland and Korea and even African countries do much better than we do. So for all of our efforts, our educational system basically is terrible. Now, I like to always put myself in the shoes of, you know, a 14-year-old 8th grader, a 15-year-old, because first of all, I'm coerced to go to school. I have to go to school. I don't have a choice in the matter. Second of all, I'm bored when I'm at school. And third of all, what I'm learning is meaningless to me. So I don't know why I'm learning what I'm learning. It's boring, and I don't have a choice in the matter. Now, you put that into a blender and mix it. There's no wonder that education is a terrible experience for most people. And it was for me. I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, oh, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and everything is just wonderful. But the fact of the matter is, most education is really terrible, and it creates a situation where kids don't learn, and frankly, if you were to ask them, they would say, I don't want to go to school, and I'm not learning anything at school. And my sentiment is, listen to your kids, they're probably right. Because there's something wrong with the way we're doing what we're doing. Now, I'm not going to say that St. Andrews does everything perfectly. I do think St. Andrews is like a high-powered sports car. It is able to be flexible, go fast, navigate the turns on the road to Chico, and at the same time not carry very many passengers. And so my remarks here are not to suggest that this is perfect here, but it is to suggest that the people in this room and the people in this institution care about trying to be a school that engages people's loves and actually creates an education that is enchanting. Now, what I want to talk about today is basically how do we ever get there, and how do we actually do that. So you actually cannot learn anything you don't love. If you're coerced, you can't love. In other words, if I were to tell you you must love somebody, that's not how you fall in love. You fall in love by being wooed. You know, it's indirection. Someone takes you out and cares for you. And then in this kind of environment, you know, the things that matter to people, their sense of security, their sense of significance, they need to know that they're loved, meaning that this is a safe place. It's a safe place to admit the fact that I have no idea what's going on in the classroom. It's a safe place to admit that I feel dumb. It's a safe place to say that I'm struggling. It's a safe place to actually be yourself. The second is a place where you have some sense of significance, namely that you are seen, that I'm seen as a person, I'm cared for as a person. Now, this does not happen to a student who comes to St. Andrews automatically. Why? Because they've usually spent 15 years or 12 years in some other educational institution that treats them like a number, and so nobody actually cares about them, and so it probably takes minimally 3 semesters, could be 3 years, to actually become a part and feel comfortable with the rhythm. Generally speaking, I always think in 3s. That is, first year, it's brand new. Second year is this is how we do it. And third year is now it's expected. But it takes 3 cycles of something to actually feel comfortable. So to a certain extent, you have to be here a while before you feel like, well, actually, this is different. These people actually do love me. I am seen. This is actually safe. I can let my guard down. It is a place where I can actually learn. The other thing is you can't actually learn if something is not meaningful. So, and if I'm going to say something is meaningful, it means 2 things. First, it has to answer the question why. Why do I need to learn this? What is the purpose of this? And most educational institutions just assume that they don't need to talk about the why. All they talk about is the what and the how. And nobody's telling you the why. And so you're like, well, I'm forced here. I don't want to be here. And I don't know the why. But the other thing is it has to be meaningful to me. That is, in some way, it has to make a connection between my life and what is important to my life and where I want to be with my life and what is of interest to me. So you can't learn what you don't love, and you can't learn if it's not meaningful. We have an educational system that doesn't provide either one of those opportunities. One more aside, and this is particularly for teachers, you also can't learn very well if it's not memorable. And not many teachers actually make a point of making sure that their lesson plans are memorable. Somehow you're supposed to remember it. But people always think first in pictures. And teachers always go first to the abstraction. We were talking about Napoleon the other day, and you were talking about the Battle of Trafalgar, and I said, well, it's like a whale fighting an elephant. And you said, what? And I said, well, because just think of it, the British have the Navy, the French have the Army, and they never can actually fight. It's the battle of the whale and the elephant. Now, you could go into the dates and to the people and the battles, etc., but at some point, the way you remember something is a picture. And so there's a book called, by Dan Heath on stickiness, and he says that if you want to teach something that's memorable, it has to be simple, it has to be unexpected, it has to be concrete, it has to be credible, it has to be emotional, and as Father Foos just said, it has to be wrapped in a story. Well, what teachers are taking ownership of actually making their assignments memorable? Really taking ownership of making it so that it's sticky, so that students actually can learn. So, we're teaching in a way that is coerced, we're teaching in a way that's not meaningful, we're teaching in a way that's not memorable, and then we're wondering why we're not actually getting very good education. Well, because our systems are perfectly designed for the results we're getting. So we've got to basically redesign our systems completely differently. Now, you actually only love something if you master it. That is, if you become really, really good at something, then you tend to love it. The process of mastery sometimes is difficult, but once you've mastered it, you then love it. I had a school and we emphasized the fact that we wanted the students to love learning. And they said, well, my daughter doesn't love learning. I said, well, that's called, because that's the end of the product, it's not the beginning of the process. You're not going to love something until you learn to master it. And you master it by learning all the details and doing all the things to get there. But you're only going to get there unless there's an on-ramp that engages your imagination and actually brings you into a sense of knowing why you're doing what you're doing. C.S. Lewis has an essay in which he talked about two different kinds of teaching. One he called the Parthenon teaching, and the other he called the optative teaching. The Parthenon teaching tries to make everything very entertaining, and you have this beautiful picture of the Parthenon, and it's so exciting and interesting, but actually you don't know anything about it. On the other is the optative, which is a tense of Latin, and you have to learn all the details and all the tenses of Latin, and then if you know the details, then when you get to the Parthenon, oh my word, it comes alive, and you know all the details. So the goal is not necessarily to make it entertaining. The goal is to make it meaningful. In one of the schools I used to run, I had a big banner over the door, there are no shortcuts. The fact is that you have to do the work to actually master it. And that's certainly the case in rowing. You're not going to win a rowing race until you master all the details of the stroke and you break it down and you practice and then you put it all together. In rowing, when you put it all together and everybody's in sync, the rowing term for flow is swing. The boat all of a sudden has swing, and all of a sudden the thing just goes 110%. The goal for us in a school is to move such that we, at some point, begin to experience swing. Now, we're going to break in a minute for fill up your coffee. But let me just talk about what's required for mastery. How do you develop mastery? Malcolm Gladwell used to say that you have to actually practice something 10,000 hours. Now that's proven to be a myth. Um, That's because for some of us it takes more than 10,000 hours. But it depends on two things. One is the quality of your practice and the quality of your coaching. That is, you need to have, it's not just putting in the hours, that's being too quantitative. It's a certain kind of practice with a certain kind of coach. Now, coaching actually matters, but it actually only matters maybe 25%. The ultimate variable in this dynamic is your motivation. That is, you're not motivated to learn, you're not going to learn. Now, I used to be a headmaster of a Christian school, and I knew that many of my students were there because they were forced to by their well-meaning Christian parents. So I spent 2 weeks interviewing every student in the school for 15 minutes. It was quite an arduous task. And I wanted to ask them, do you want to be here or not? And I wanted to get rid of any student in the school who didn't want to be there. And I had one student who came in to meet with the headmaster with his earrings on, his Metallica t-shirt, and his presentation of self was pretty clear. And he said to me, Dr. Seal, I really do not want to be here. My mother's on the board, I feel forced to be here, and this is just a terrible experience for me. I said, well, you need to really take ownership of your life. It cannot be that difficult a project. All you need to do is bring $25 worth of marijuana to school and your history. Just like that. And he looked at me like, what did I just hear you say? And well, because he was edgy, I was going to be edgy back. But the thing I was going to tell him was, it's your life. You take ownership. You take responsibility for your life, and stop complaining about your parents. And it turns out it was a success story. I don't have all success stories, but he turned it around, graduated, and went on to do well in life. There is no substitute for motivation. If you don't want to learn, nobody's going to be able to force you to learn. But the fact of the matter is, the person you're hurting the most, of course, is yourself. Because the goal is for you to become the full person that you're capable of being, made in the image of God. Now, the other myth of mastery is ability. There is a myth of ability. That is, they say some people are math people, and some people are STEM people, and some people are humanities people, and we basically allow ourselves to be put into these little boxes. And the fact of the matter, that's actually not true. Anybody can learn anything. It just has to be broken down into little pieces, mixed with a whole bunch of encouragement and a high level of expectation. You put that together, anybody can learn. There was a playwright in Canada. He was a starving artist, wrote plays, and he was not making enough money in his artistic endeavors, and so he decided to tutor kids. Now, he was a artist type, not a math type, but he got plugged into tutoring math kids, and so he went after it. He needed the money. And you basically only can learn something if you can connect it to something you already know, like Legos. You have to, each piece has to fit. And you have to break every math problem down into smaller little pieces, and once you know the steps, you can solve every kind of problem. So he broke everything down into little steps, mixed a whole bunch of encouragement, and told people that anybody can master it. And lo and behold, they did. And now he has an organization called JUMP, Junior Underachieving Math Prodigies. His name is John Mighton. He went on to get his PhD in math, and now he's a string theory astrophysicist, as well as a playwright, and he's married to a playwright. So he proved the fact that actually this myth of ability is just a way of limiting your potential. And if there's a case study other than John Mighton for that fact, I promise you, I'm standing in front of you. Homeschooled, basically, you learn to read in the second grade, basically. My parents decided that we would drive across the country, get on a freighter, get in a hurricane, typhoon in the Pacific, and all during my second grade year. So basically I lost my second grade year, and so I didn't really learn how to read, and we already know how my first grade was going. And so the fact of the matter is, I went to a boarding school. The entire high school was 50, my class was 7. I graduated third, right behind my roommate who was a salutatorian. I think I got, my SAT score was basically what you get when you write your name on the top of the page. How I got into college, I do not know. Now I do college placement, and I went to a college I had never seen before. I went to the college by myself on a trailway bus with a footlocker, having never been in this country before, not knowing how to use American money. I knew that dimes, nickels and quarters were larger than dimes, but I was getting very confused between nickels and quarters. I mean, you think that's like rocket science until you have grown up somewhere else. I didn't know how to use an American phone. I had no idea what my sizes were in the store. I mean, I was on my own until my junior year. It was the next time I saw my parents. So the fact that I survived and have stayed in education is a testament to the myth of ability. Now my parents were very bright, and in God's good providence, all of that brightness went to my kid sister, 10 years younger than I am. Literally, so, you know, I'm the struggling student, and she's like Einstein. I mean, it's, and of course, you know, she's on the faculty at Harvard Medical School today, of course, what you'd expect. You don't get into education unless your imagination is somehow captured. And your imagination is going to be captured if you see something holistically, if you see the whole picture. And most of the time, we just break things down into little pieces, never explain the why, and then we come away basically confused with a fragmented understanding. Nothing actually makes sense. We're talking about a curriculum. I'm working with Father Foos on a curriculum, and we're looking at another college, and they have broken their curriculum down into very neat little boxes, but there's no rationale. So the question is, how is anybody going to come away from that kind of an education knowing what education is for and what it's about? And let me give you a picture. If we really wanted to understand about a rabbit, in biology class, we would take that rabbit and we would dissect the rabbit. And we'd have a lab table, and we would, after a course of several weeks, have every piece of the, poor rabbit, Hopsy, all over the table with little flags on them. Liver, heart, knee, tendon, right? Now, the educational approach has been that if you break something down into its little pieces, that's the way you'll understand what's going on with the rabbit. Now, I want to challenge that. Who knows a rabbit better? That scientist or that student who's now dissected poor Hopsy all over the table, or the Northern European Renaissance painter Albert Dürer, who painted a hare? Who knows what rabbitness is better? Which form of education has more love involved for the subject? Can you see the love in this picture? Now, there's one thing better than painting a painting of a rabbit, hare. This is the hare. And that is actually raising Hopsy from a baby in your backyard or in your room, as was the case for me when I was growing up. So, experience, imagination, reason. This is education with love that sees the whole. Now, if you start there, can you learn something more by breaking it down and dissecting the rabbit? Sure. But you can't start by breaking it down if you don't understand and love the whole. Do you see the difference? And all of our education has been framed about breaking things into pieces with never giving you a sense of the whole, never capturing your imagination. And we end up with straw and cardboard, to use the metaphor that Father Foose used earlier. Now, if you use the word enchantment, which is what I'm trying to get to, I want to be enchanted. Well, that means that there has to be something that's pulling me. My own longing for understanding that is drawing me into something larger than myself. That connects with me emotionally, but actually is something that connects with my dreams and my sense of enchantment that's larger than myself. And I want our educational experience to be that kind of experience that draws you into a world that is ultimately magical. So then the question then is, how do we create a world of educational enchantment? There are 4 steps. After a 5-minute break and you get coffee, I will tell you what they are. I'm right back. To how you engage the imagination. Now, there could be 5. There could be 6, but I'm going to give you 4. The way you engage the imagination is first to thinking about your educational environment ecologically. That is the place in which you do your learning. You learn through the osmosis of the place in which you're surrounded. Now, I'm particularly fond of this school building. I like it better than the old one. Maybe because I'm particularly fond of the fact that all schools should have a bar in them. But, but this building is not the school, is it? This is a garage that houses the sports car. Education is the invisible stuff that happens in this space. But this space, framed by a library and an altar, creates a kind of milieu and context that creates an ecology that makes learning possible. The other thing is that there are certain things that you learn here that have nothing to do with textbooks. Like the responsibility of lighting the fire every morning, the responsibility every students have of vacuuming and cleaning this place every Friday. In other words, there's a rhythm to this life. This is in effect, a monastic existence of a rhythm. And frankly, the three environments in which a child is placed, normally the family, the neighborhood, and the school, ideally need to be in sync. In some cases, they're not. And when they're not, it's much better. If you want intensity for learning, go to a boarding school. If you want intensity, get in that rhythm where you basically the entire, I mean, bless the Fooses family, but their life is a rhythm of, so I flew in from Philadelphia. I casually asked, so what time is breakfast? That'd be 6:15, and chapel is at 7:30. You make your lunches between those. And I was like, oh, this is we will get going. And I was just blessed by the fact that I was on East Coast time. So 6:30 was actually 9:30, or 6:15 was 9:15. But the fact of the matter is, you get into that rhythm, you're learning something larger than just what you learn in a textbook. You're learning because you are in an ecology, an ecosystem of learning. There are lots of kids today that have no books in their home, no parents that read a book. They have no idea of how to feel comfortable in a place like this. They wouldn't even know how to handle a book. I mean, one of the things you teach students, I suspect they do here, is how to break in a book. I mean, you don't just crack the back. You break in a book because you love the book. And if you're a book person, you love the smell of books, particularly new books. And so, but how do you become that kind of person that loves the smell of books? By being in an ecosystem like this kind of environment. Now, the other thing that is important is that you need an education that flips the script. Now, in most places today, this is how we're taught to learn. Head, heart, hand. If you've studied Bible study, it's observation, interpretation, application. Well, we know from neuroscience and from education that that's actually wrong, actually 100% backwards. That's not actually how anybody learns. And what we need to do is to flip the script. How do people learn? Hand, heart, head. Experience, capturing the imagination through story, song, and poetry, and then reflecting on it after the fact after you've had the experience and the engagement of your heart, the imagination. And so all of our education basically is backwards. So when we do our lesson plans, teachers, we should probably think about, what can we do first with what I'm trying to teach? And then we can talk about the why, and then we can talk about the how. But often we have been so inculcated, the academic term for this is enlightenment. The enlightenment approach to learning is head, heart, hand. Well, we know from neuroscience it's just the reverse. We have to reverse the process. And so if you're going to engage people's imagination, you're going to have to reverse the educational process. And one of the things that does, one of the consequences of that is that the third E, it means that education has to be embodied. If you want to learn something, you need to get your body into it. You need to get physical with it. In the Middle Ages, when people were learning a craft and they would get sore muscles, they would say the craft is entering into their body. That the sore muscles was a way that the routine of doing what they were doing, building a house, whatever it was, building a cathedral, the pain of that was entering into their body. It was becoming who they were. And ideally, an education is about mastering the process of learning such that you actually, it becomes a variation of you. Now, one of the things that bugs me, always has bugged me, mainly because I needed it, no one talked to me about it, is we send kids to school, but we never actually teach them how to learn or study. Somehow they're expected to know how to manage the affairs of school. So remember, I grew up in a homeschool environment, and then we came to the United States. My parents were missionaries, so we came to the United States on furlough, and I was in the 7th grade at Walker Junior High School in Bradenton, Florida, a Florida high school of 4,000 middle schoolers. And it was just a middle school, 4,000. And it was one of these Florida schools that were rambling with outdoor corridors because it's warm all year round. Well, I had a locker. I'd never had a locker before. I had a backpack full of books that, in the irony of American education, the younger the student, the heavier the backpack. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's 50-pound backpack for a 7th grader. By this time they're senior, little paperbacks and, you know, nothing. But, so I went and the bell rang. Well, I have 5 minutes to move from this classroom to the other end of the hallway, somehow managing through 4,000 students, figuring out in this 5-minute period where and when I'm going to go to the bathroom and not be late to the class, because if I'm late to the class, I'm going to be marked. Now, I thought to myself, this is genuinely absurd. They should leave the students and let the teachers change classrooms. This is craziness, navigating all this. Well, this is what they do. Now, did we have any practice like you would do in the military? Like, okay, today we're doing a drill. How to change classrooms, how to actually manage your locker. Now, students go home and they're like, oh, I left this, I don't know where my this homework is and that homework is. Well, has anybody taught them how to manage their material? No. Now, and then they're wondering why they don't learn anything when life is chaos, and that's not even the mix into the mix. The social dynamics of school, which actually have much more priority than any educational dynamics. It's always friends, athletics, education, in that order, and I don't care what kind of headmaster you are, never forget that that order is always true. And no matter what kind of school you're going to be running, it's still friends, athletics, education. Now, the point being is somewhere along the line, you need to help kids master this, but no one does. So we tell kids to read this essay. So you get homework, read this essay. And I asked the kids, well, did you read it? Yes, my eyes actually went over the page and I turned the page. Well, is that reading? No. Did you mark the text? Do you know actually what it says at the end? And what did you underline? Well, some people, they think, oh, I need to mark a text, so I'll get a highlighter. And so I am now marking the text, and the teacher really wants to know that I read the thing. So here's my approach. I will highlight the entire page. And that will prove to the teacher that I have actually moved a highlighter over the entire book. Which, if you have a yellow page book, it's very good for landing planes at the end of a runway. But it actually says nothing at the end of an aircraft carrier, but it has actually nothing to say about learning. You actually have to learn how to mark a text. But who's taking the time to teach kids how to do that? Now, I marked all my texts. And your text marking should be about 80% of what I underline. Now, to get you some idea of the absurdity of all this, I had a roommate. My first roommate in boarding school was terrible. And so I was moved from the junior high wing to the senior high wing. And so I had a roommate, Herb Coddington, who was 3 years older than I was. So I was in the 8th grade, he was in the 11th grade. And he was my idol. He was really a godly Christian, dating the best looking girl in the school, and a good athlete. I mean, and he ran cross country when he was on furlough, so he had actually been in American sports, which made him on the mission field like, you know, an athletic god, and so he was my roommate. And I noticed that Herb Coddington, because he was such a good Christian, would underline in his Bible. So being the idiot I did, when Herb was not there, I took his Bible and I underlined everything he underlined in my Bible, which is kind of a missed point. But I promise you, that's how we teach kids how to study. Namely, we don't. I wrote this book, study skills book. It was really a curriculum I wrote for 8th graders. And then that curriculum was not enough for a book, so I threw in every thought I'd ever had on education into the book too. But I'm passionate about the fact that you've got to actually learn how to study if you're going to study. That is, you have to learn how to get embodied. Now, Father Foose quoted James K. A. Smith, who is one of my mentors and was a professor of philosophy at Calvin College. And he writes, education is not something that traffics primarily in abstract, disembodied ideas. Rather, education is a holistic endeavor that involves the whole person, including our bodies, in a process of formation that aims our desires, primes our imagination, and orients us to the world, all before we start thinking about it. Well, that's my factor. Now, add to this larger problem of education, throw in one other little wrinkle. That's called COVID and Zoom education. And we are really talking about death. I mean, my heart goes out to these kids. It's like, this is absurd. I can't breathe, I've gotta wear this mask, the whole thing I know is absurd, the whole education thing is absurd, I'm not learning anything, the whole process I hate, and every further day I go, I hate, and no one is listening to me, and so I'm gonna act out, and this is just the pattern of everybody today, and I'm like, okay, I'm with the kids. I couldn't put up with that for 10 seconds. And no business would put up with it. Okay, we're gonna run your business in a way that your customers are bored, if your product is meaningless to them, yeah. And you're gonna force them to buy it. What kind of business are you gonna be running? No business. Yeah, well, welcome to modern education. That's just what we do. Well, I just think this whole project is really absurd. So I was particularly taken with the quote of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who wrote The Little Prince. This is a quote from The Little Prince. The Little Prince is the second most popular published book in the world, after the Bible. Now, I read a 560-page biography of Saint-Exupéry. He was a real son of a gun. Not a wonderful role model for anybody. He was kind of a combination of Kim Kardashian and I mean, he was really just a terrible human being, and a drunkard, and a womanizer, and so not exactly the role model of role models. Except he was a bad student like I was, and an idealist. So he was somebody who had longings and knew that there had to be a better way. He actually wrote The Little Prince in a rental house in Long Island, although he was French. He was a pilot. And part of the reason he became famous is because he was a daredevil pilot and not a particularly good pilot. And he ran out of fuel and was lost at sea in the Mediterranean at the end of World War. Well, basically 2 weeks before the end of World War II. So the fact that he became mythic, you know, when you have a famous novelist who is a military guy who dies in a military combat mission and they never find his body, then you become mythic. So he became kind of larger than life person. He wrote this in Little Prince. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. That's enchantment. If you want somebody to build a ship, make them long for the immensity of the sea. So we need to basically build that mindset into our education. That means an education that pulls us because of our longings, right? Rather than pushing us because of my parents and or the state is forcing me in. If I'm walking the streets here, the Chester sheriff will pick you up for truancy. Although here, you're probably walking to Chapel. And you would have some, and since Father Foos is best friends with the sheriff, you could probably get off easily. This kind of enchantment means that it has to connect with your emotional longing. Some of you have dreams. The students I feel worst about are kids that basically don't care about anything and have no dreams. And you know that. That's the one big problem with marijuana, is that it will, I mean, there's several, but one of them is that it will make you not have dreams. The other problem with marijuana is that if you smoke it under the age of 21, it will make you dumb. It will reduce your IQ by 8 points or 9 points permanently, never to be fixed again. And I don't know about you, but I don't have 9 points to give. Now, you heard it from me first. If you want to smoke after 21, the health benefits are, that's a different thing. But boy, don't make yourself dumb. But the problem with students who don't have dreams, have a dream. And if we're talking about the endless immensity of the sea, your dreams may even be larger, dare I say it, than Chester. They may even take you to such metropolises as Chico, or Reno. Dream big dreams. Now, particularly to the women here, I work with a lot of college placement, and within the Christian environment, somehow women are supposed to be very demure and not to have any dreams and not have any kind of purposes in life. And if you have any of those purposes in life, you're probably a feminist, and that's probably a bad thing. And I mean, that's the way. So there's a way of basically squashing the full potential of who you are. And I'm like, no, get out of the way. Be all you can be for Christ and His kingdom. Have big dreams. Explore them. And let other people assist you in making those dreams come true. So, to have enchantment in education means it has to connect with your emotional longings. It has to connect with motivated effort. And it has to tie somehow to your vision of yourself. That is, the enchantment of what is possible in education has to connect with my dreams of who I see myself to be. Now, no one normally thinks of the U.S. Forestry Department as being the hippest of governmental institutions. But they did something unbelievably correct recently. They did a PSA ad campaign that started with capturing the imagination of the tween student, the 12-year-old. I saw this and I was like, who in the world did this? I knew it was not somebody my age who did it. I mean, I just knew this is a PSA done by a millennial. I knew that much, or Gen Z. Turns out it was a bunch of students at the University of Utah who did it. And in the infinite wisdom of the U.S. Forestry Department, they listened. Now, the problem the U.S. Forestry Department has is that no kids want to go to the forest. There's a name for that. It's called what's the name of it? The deficit? Oh, nature deficit disorder. As some kids have said, I don't really like to go outside because there's no plugs. Because all I want to do is play video games. And so the forestry department is trying to get kids to actually go walking in the woods. Now there was a book written on this subject called Into the Woods, or no, it's called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Love. And they could have done the science and why walking in the woods is healthy and why it can expel, and they could have done the whole STEM thing about walking in the woods. I mean, the whole possibility, right? For the US Forest Department could have done a PSA, they had the full amount of government money. That's not what they did. So they have this little girl talking to her iPad. And she says, Siri, do trees tell stories to each other? Siri, ever the IT rationalist, says, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. Her father, who's making a sandwich in the kitchen, overhears her, and he turns to her and says, I got an idea, let's go into the woods. They go into the woods, and he hears the rustling of the trees and the wind in the leaves, and he hears the trees talking to each other. And that broadens the aperture of her imagination, and she says, do clouds take naps? And she sees the clouds low on the horizon at the edge of the lake. She says, can birds draw pictures? And she sees a flock of startling commemorations. She says, do stars visit their friends? And they're walking back to their car, and she sees a shooting star. And it ends. And I'm like, all they did, they didn't say, you know, it's really good for your health to go into the woods and walk. They said, look, if I want you to build a ship, I am going to get you to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And if I want you to go to the woods, I'm going to make you know that that is the place where your imagination can touch magic. Where trees talk to each other, where birds draw pictures, where clouds take naps, and where stars visit friends. Now, we need that kind of education. We need the kind of education that starts with whole people, puts them in a whole context, an ecology, engages them experientially, makes it embodied, a part of who they are because of the rhythm of their life and the way they frame their days, and then enchants their imagination in a way that connects with their deepest longings and understanding of themselves and their own dreams. Now, some of you are thinking about going to college. The same questions should be asked of parents who are thinking about sending their kids to a place like this. Where is there a culture where this kind of learning is aspired to? When kids go choose colleges, I was like, so how many of the kids in the school you're going to really want to learn anything? There are quite a few party schools in this neighborhood. I know them. So the fact of the matter is, one marketing person said, you will become the lowest common denominator of your 5 best friends. Who are your 5 best friends? What are their aspirations in life? Now, we know this in gaming. You play among better players, you will level up. Are your friends helping you to level up? Or are they bringing you down? You go to a school, what kind of culture do they have? Is this a culture that would even dare to show up on a day like Saturday morning to actually hear about an educational lecture on education on Enchantment. Well, there's some schools that are that way, and not many. Go to those kind of places because the environment you're in will shape you fundamentally. And then get experience, get it embodied, and then connect your education with your dreams. Think holistically.
Excuse me, sorry.
And lastly, I would simply say this. You're wisest if you're a parent. Listen to your kids. Most of the time, the kids are saying, this is terrible. And in most cases, they're right. And I know so because, like Expierre, I was daydreaming out the window. I was a poor student with high aspirations. I was an idealist poor student. And our goal is to make this place the kind of environment that will take your dreams and allow you to experience your fullest potential. It doesn't take a big thing to make a lot. I used to say, I used to run small schools, and I would say, you know, give me Jesus in a hillside or Plato in a pup tent, and we can make it happen. And my rowing team, you knew you were gonna get this. So we were a school of 150 students. The first year, we didn't have enough money to buy a rowing boat. All we had money to do was to buy t-shirts that said Cambridge Rowing. We wore our t-shirts, Cambridge Rowing. We spent the entire rowing season rowing on rowing machines, never once getting on the water. Now, that is about as boring and terrible as possible, except what do they learn? They learn the rhythm, culture, and etiquette of the boathouse in ways that they would never have learned any other way. And they became the model students in the boathouse. So the next year we had one boat, we had 7 rowers, and we rowed in a quad. And a school of 150, and we went to the national championship against, you know, Exeter, Andover, Hill School, all the schools in California. I mean, it was actually a big school in Laguna Beach. It was a big rowing school. They didn't know, nobody knew who we were. 150 in the whole school, one boat. In fact, we won the state championship in a double, not a quad, and we didn't own a double, so we had to borrow a double from the boathouse. And Ever the missionary, they gave us their spare double, which had actually fallen off the trailer at 60 miles an hour and flown over 4 lanes of highway and landed in the grass and then been repaired. Well, let me explain. A repaired fiberglass shell is somewhat heavier than a brand new shell. And it had skin that was peeling, and you'd have to push it after a race, and water would come squirting out, and it was literally absorbing water as you rowed. This was what we were rowing in. So, but we had high aspirations. And we trained. And the little train that, you know, said that we could, we was like, we were gonna make it happen. And I had no idea. I mean, I had never rowed in college, so I didn't know how we were gonna do. I hired an assistant coach who had rowed for Cambridge in England. She was very nervous, so, and basically in Texas, there was not a lot of water. So all the races in Texas are 1,000 meters. All the races in the nationals are 2,000 meters. Let me explain, that's a different race, completely. So we trained, but normally, and you have several heats. In a heat, you want to preserve your energy, right? But we had never raced, my boys had never ever raced 2,000 meters before, so basically the coach's instruction were pedal to the metal, go hard as you can, make it happen. So they went out, first heat of the day, won the heat. I looked at their times. Their times were the same times as the gold medal winner for the year before. I was like, oh my word, we're actually competitive. I had no idea. But the fact is that kind of mindset, high expectations, never thinking that because you're small, you can't reach and play the game at the largest possible level. Last week was Daytona 500. You probably don't expect me to be a NASCAR guy, but I am, much to my wife's chagrin. Sophisticated people are Formula One people, but less so. She says that, yes, he's NASCAR because he's missionary. She says, it's also true about syrup. I like Aunt Jemima's syrup. My wife likes the exotic kinds of syrup, and I'm like, I can't deal with the exotic. I have to do the blue collar syrup. And so in NASCAR last week, there are these very small teams. They have one car. They barely get enough money to go to one race, and they may even run only in 2 or 3 races in the season. So they're not a full orb team. They're like a miniature team. But last week until the next to last lap, it was one of these one owner, one car, small teams that came within a heartbeat of winning the Daytona 500. The reason I mention is that that's how I think of this place. Small, high expectations, huge potential, and what happens within these walls ultimately is magic because it's aimed toward enchantment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zinn. Always a pleasure to have him with us. It's been too long. I think the last time he was here was 2018 commencement. So nice to have you back. We are going to head for brunch. Sorry, those that are with us from a distance. I hope your brunch is as good as ours. Or maybe for some of you it might be getting close to dinner time. Anyways, thank you for coming. We're going to walk out this door in a few minutes, circle around, and we're so very thankful that the Wesleyan Church has partnered with us today to provide us space to have our brunch. So please thank Pastor Kyle and his brother Jacob. They were here earlier, but they left to kind of make sure everything was ready over there. I think that's it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.